Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2. Today I wanted to make a quick video showing you Sorc players out there what the absolute best leveling build is so that you can get to endgame pretty easily, but also you can actually carry this build into the endgame with pretty much zero gear at all and do absolutely fine. I'm going to end up min-maxing this and probably swapping a good bit of things for it for like later endgame, but I was able to very easily do world tier 4 stuff like 10 levels under, and you guys should have absolutely no problems using this build. So I figured I'd just pump this out there for you guys that are interested in playing Sorc and you want to know what build that you guys should be starting out with. Hopefully by the time that you guys are around like level 70 to 80 and have access to some of the uniques, I will have an updated version of the build probably already posted on the channel with an endgame variation, so make sure to look out for that. But as you can see in the gameplay, the build absolutely cranks. You can do plenty of damage and the survivability is like extremely insane. The only downside is your single target damage, but because you can just survive pretty much everything, you will literally never die to a boss. It'll just take a little bit longer, and hopefully that will get fixed with the endgame variation of the build. For leveling though, this is probably one of the fastest builds in the game, and it's quite a lot of fun to play as well. Before we get into things, I want to mention that all of my builds will be over on Mobalytics, including this one. This is a leveling variation. Like I said, I'm going to update it and make it more of an endgame variation later, but right now I just have some of the more pertinent information, and you can even toggle it to have how you want to spend the skill points in order. I would still recommend watching the video because I'm going to go over a lot of things that I simply just do not have listed here, but Mobalytics is great. I'd highly recommend you guys download the desktop app, which is completely for free. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of builds here that even have tier lists, so you can check out all sorts of builds for Season 3, get an idea of, the Fireball Meteor, which is something that I want to play. And the UI is pretty sleek. You can very easily just look at everything. And something that's really cool with the desktop app is you can actually pop it open in game. So you could look at a skill tree side by side, for example, Paragon board, and even like stuff that you want on the gear, for example. You can also toggle being able to see when like world bosses and Legion events are going to pop up via a timer, but there's just a lot of really cool stuff in here. It's a fantastic way to discover new builds. And like I said, every single build that I post moving forward will be posted on here. So I would highly recommend checking it out. All right, let's just get into the build. Again, if you want to see exactly how to spend your skill points, you can easily reference it. Just check the link in the description. I'm extremely tired right now because I haven't really been sleeping much due to some personal stuff, so sorry if I'm not all that articulate. I will do my best, but if you really do enjoy the content, I would really appreciate hearing it down in the comments below. Any sort of support at all would really just mean a lot to me right now, but sob story out of the way. Getting into how you want to spend your skills while leveling up, I'd highly recommend starting out with your basic as Arc Lash because getting the movement speed is really nice and it generates a good amount of resource. At some point, like later into the game, you will end up just taking Arc Lash off of your bar. Now, what I did starting out is I went full Chain Lightning, and once I got to around level 14, I swapped to Firewall. On the leveling website, I'm not really able to do that because I can't like put spec Fireball and then swap out of it. The reason that I'm spec'd Fireball is because you go Fireball Enchant later, and that like completely carries your AoE clear, and it's extremely strong. So you could either decide to start with Fireball just for fun, because you really only use it for like 10 levels or whatever, or you can start out with Chain Lightning, which is like a little bit more optimal. But I'm literally just going to follow what I have posted on the website. Just keep in mind that you can go Chain Lightning for like slightly more efficiency, and Fireball might kind of feel like shit. I only go 5 points because we're not going to grab this stuff. It doesn't like synergize well with Fireball Enchant later. We grab Teleport, Glass Cannon, and keep in mind you can always swap some stuff around. Like if you really want a lower cooldown in Teleport, or you want some survivability, you really want Flame Shield with movement speed early on, like obviously feel free to make that judgment call on your own. This is kind of just how I did things while leveling. Then we want to go into Ice Armor with Enhanced Ice Armor. With this build, it's good to have a lot of cooldowns because the pretty much only way that we're getting mana back is using Prodigies. We can actually use the pet to get a lot of mana back, which I'll talk about in a bit, but early on you can go get Prodigies aspect like instantly. So once you're like level 20 or so, you want to slap this on, and it completely carries your mana generation, and then you just rotate using cooldowns such as Teleport, Ice Armor, Flame Shield, and I end up using Ice Blades, but you could also decide to use Frost Nova instead. The problem with Frost Nova is you have to put points, and Vulnerable is not nearly as good as it used to be, so it isn't crazy, and it has a longer cooldown. The reason that I end up going for Ice Blades later is because it has a lower cooldown, and it synergizes with Tal Rasha, dealing frost damage. Making your pet deal damage of an element type doesn't work for Tal Rasha, which is a little unfortunate. Anyways, getting into the rest of the skill points, I grab Flame Shield here, Enhanced Flame Shield, Mystical for the mana cost reduction, and at this point you can start going into Firewall. I have some ranks from my amulet and my pants right now, so don't worry about that. You just max out Firewall, grab Enhanced Firewall, and Mage's Firewall. After that, we want to get Inferno, so that we can get Supreme Inferno, which just gives you no mana, and it also is really good because it pulls everything in. It does count as a cooldown, even though it is a bit of a long cooldown. You could argue you don't necessarily need this while farming stuff like Domain Tunnels, but I do think it's really helpful. At this point, you can decide to go for damage or survivability. Getting Warmth is extremely good, but Inner Flames is like 9% damage, and then grabbing Warmth just like will literally full heal you all the time. It's really, really nice. And then you can also grab Combustion. This is just going to give you a lot of extra damage. Unfortunately, the secondary part of it isn't really that good or worth playing around. It's just going to give you 20% extra damage. At this point, I'm just going to grab Ice Blades for another cooldown to cycle with Prodigy's aspect, and then we can go into Elemental Dominance over here for just 9% additional damage. And the mana cost shouldn't be as big of a deal as we start getting later into endgame and our character's a bit more built out. Well, not endgame, but you know what I mean. Then we want to go into Align the Elements with triple protection, so that we have a barrier active, which is going to work with Conceited, which I'd highly recommend you guys get early on, which I'll talk about in a second. And then Mana Shield is just fantastic for a lot of damage reduction that you'll have almost all the time. If you're cycling Teleport with the 30% DR, you get this 21% DR almost all the time, and you're constantly healing with Warmth. And then later on, you start getting some DR from burning in the Paragon board and stuff. Like, the survivability with this build is actually completely nuts. At this point, I just go 2 points into Endless Pyre just for a little bit of extra damage, particularly for high health elites and stuff that are a little pesky to kill. And then we go into Precision Magic because with our enchants, we are going to be using the Firewall enchant. And then at this point, again, you could do this earlier, but at this point, I like to go into Shimmering Teleport for the DR. And Teleport is my favorite skill to max out because it gives you mobility, but it also gives you the damage reduction almost all the time. And having it on a low cooldown is really good for synergizing with Prodigy. When it comes to your enchants, I briefly mentioned this, but should be kind of obvious. You want to be using the first enchant you want to use, like the second that you hit level 15, is Fireball. This just completely carries you. Anytime you kill an enemy, they just explode, and it does Fireball's damage. Later on, you probably don't use this, but I'm still using it even right now at level 70, and it seems to work pretty well. And I'm not sure if it's bugged, but playing with my friend, it is actually proccing off of his kills as well, which is helping him with his clear speed a lot. Later on, I may swap off of this, but it's a ton of fun to play with, and early on, it's extremely strong. For your next enchant, you want to go Firewall just because you get an extra chance of proccing Firewalls. Later into the game, once we get some Meteor stuff, you could very easily swap Fireball to Meteor enchant, and there's even a world where you don't use Firewall enchant at all, and you use Teleport, but I'm going to have to be messing around with that a lot. And you may end up even swapping off of Firewall later, so we'll have to wait and see how that ends up working out. When it comes to Legendaries, there's only a few I would recommend you guys go out of your way to get. First would be Disobedience, because this just gives you a crazy amount of survivability. You can get it on like the bottom left of the map, I believe. Definitely grab this prior to doing the Capstone Dungeon, but you don't need it earlier than like level 50. One of the damage aspects I'd recommend you guys go out of your way to get would be Conceited. You'll have a barrier active almost all the time, and this will work for all damage that you're dealing. And it's a very low conditional, and it just is a good bit of extra damage. This elemental damage thing is pretty weak, but if you can just find it on a piece of gear, extract it, and then imprint it on something, it's an okay amount of damage every once in a while that isn't too conditional, so you'll have it up. Getting Prodigy early on is probably the most important thing, so you have enough mana to be pressing Firewall. Once you have Prodigy and you just rotate your cooldowns properly, like mana is pretty much not a thing. I have not had any mana issues thus far, and my character has been kind of a piece of crap, to be honest. I would kind of stay away from Storm Swell or even this Ice Barrier or Ice Blades thing because your vulnerable uptime is going to be extremely low while leveling. Later on, we'll probably have some pretty good vulnerable uptime, but these are the only legendaries I'd worry about while leveling. Getting Talrashas, I got lucky and this just dropped in Domain Tunnels. This is a massive damage increase. Can't exactly take advantage of it as good as we used to be able to, but it's still really good. I'd also recommend looking out for Engulfing Flames if it happens to drop. This is just a pretty sizable damage increase for you, and it actually, the better that your build is, the more that this will even scale up, and it will just drastically increase your clear times. Other than that, there's not many legendaries you'd want to look out for. A lot of people would recommend using Aspect of Control, which is damage against enemies that are either immobilized or frozen. The only way to take advantage of this early on is with Crippling Flames, which is a very low lucky hit chance to immobilize enemies, and then Frost Nova, which is a really long cooldown. It's just not enough uptime, in my opinion, to play around with, and eventually you want to use Ice Blades for multiple reasons anyway. I think you end up playing Control later with something like the Raiment Chest, but for leveling, I really wouldn't worry about it at all. When it comes to the pet, I have a lot to say about the pet. Honestly, while leveling, It's really bad because it takes a crazy amount of time, not only to just unlock all of these, like I've been doing a ton of vaults. It takes a long time to unlock all of these, but also leveling them. And they are pretty bad when it's very low level. While you're leveling up, the damage that these do is extremely underwhelming, and the support skills that you're going to get out of them are really not that good. I think once everything is like leveled up to, rank like 7 at least, then the pet will start to feel pretty nice. But early on, when stuff isn't leveled up, it's extremely underwhelming and weak. So while leveling, I'll just tell you some things to look out for. Like I'd look out for Flash of Adrenaline. It just increases your damage. You can increase the duration of this buff. You can reduce the cooldown that it takes for your pet to actually cast this on you. And I have arcing so that it also gives a buff to my friend. And hopefully our pets like desync their cooldown. So then his has arcing and it hits me, and maybe we just have higher uptime that way. But it's pretty low uptime, small damage increase. It'll end up being very good at higher ranks, but early on it's pretty not good. And then I have utility to just give me a barrier. This is kind of weak. You could use a different governing stone that like does damage or something, but like I said, while leveling it kind of doesn't matter. What I end up wanting to use is lightning bolt because it has a really low cooldown, and then you pair this with resource support, where anytime lightning bolt hits an enemy, you gain resource, and then you pair that with arcing so that it hits, I guess like it'll hit 12 enemies or so, and then you can increase the attack speed via swift support here, or you could end up using breaking support for guaranteed vulnerable application, but this only guaranteed vulnerable application once it's rank 10. So as you can see, a lot of this stuff just doesn't synergize or work very well when it's low level, because getting 2 resource on arcing bolt or lightning bolt that is only going to hit 2 enemies every 1.5 seconds is like 100 times worse than getting 12 resource when you're hitting 12 enemies every 1 second. You know what I mean? So early on, I just recommend playing around with stuff. Like I'm using fortify support and it gives me some fortify. This thing, I don't know. I don't know, man. It's pretty bad. Somehow I haven't gotten the resource one. It's the only one that I'm missing. Eventually we'll get Evernight and Genesis, and that will be pretty strong. Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments. Some people will probably mention, oh, why don't you use a support that does a damage type to proc Tal Rasha? That doesn't work because it counts as the pet doing the damage, not you dealing the damage. You could end up getting some synergy by like dealing lightning damage to enemies, dealing cold damage, yada yada, but while leveling, it just isn't worth it. And increasing crit damage that you do to enemies is worthless while you're playing Firewall because you can't crit. The taunt stuff doesn't seem good. Crit chance doesn't work while using Firewall, sorry. Like a lot of the stuff is just really underwhelming, and the actual like damage stones, making your pet do like pummel or something, like it's just a tiny amount of damage, Maybe once it's leveled up, it'll be better. But yeah, sorry if that wasn't particularly insightful. I plan to grind out the pet like crazy today and test a lot of stuff. Again, let me know in the comments if you found anything particularly useful when it comes to the pets. But my initial impression is that they're almost useless until you end up getting stuff really high leveled, which is crazy hard to do because it's completely RNG which ones you level, and they just aren't going to be good until you have multiple things that synergize well with each other at like a decently high level. This damage reduction one is also pretty nice if you want it, but like 3% damage reduction right now, but when it's max leveled, it's going to be like 15% or 20% or something. Like, come on, Blizzard. Anyways, that's pretty much it for the video. Hopefully you guys found it helpful. If you did, please make sure to leave a comment down below, like the video, yada yada. And again, I will have an endgame version of this probably posted either later tonight or tomorrow morning. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys later. Peace.